Welcome to another episode of the video on Chains of Empire, Slavery in Rome and America, a true modern-day slavery story. For more video like this, subscribe, like, and share our channel. Life Fact Daily. Two empires, two systems, both horrific, both powerful, but shaped by very different rules. In ancient Rome, slavery was a norm, woven into the daily rhythm of life. It was not just tolerated, but celebrated as a sign of power, wealth, and prestige. The Roman household was incomplete without slaves. They were teachers, cleaners, cooks, farmers, and artisans. They raised children who were not their own, built temples for gods they did not worship, and carried soldiers' gear into wars they did not choose. In America, however, slavery took on a darker, more rigid form, one that was not only brutal but racialized. It was an institution designed to divide, to strip generations of people of identity and humanity, and to turn profit into the highest law. Where Rome's slavery was flexible, sometimes even offering freedom, America's system was designed to be permanent and inherited. At the height of the Roman Empire, around 10% to 20% of the population was enslaved. In a society of 50 to 60 million, that meant between 5 and 12 million human beings living in bondage. Some scholars even suggest that number rose to 15 million during Rome's most aggressive years of conquest. The empire stretched from Hadrian's Wall in northern England to the deserts of Mesopotamia. Its size alone created a constant demand for labor. And yet, most slaves lived in urban centers like Rome, Carthage, Antioch, and Alexandria. There, they cleaned streets, worked in kitchens, maintained aqueducts, and even served in government offices. In the countryside, they worked the vast agricultural estates called latifundia, producing wheat, olives, and wine that fed not just Rome, but the empire's armies across the world. In the Roman legions, slaves were never the fighters. Citizenship was required for military service. But slaves followed armies into battle, carrying supplies, digging trenches, tending to horses, and cooking meals. Some would even be ordered to dig the graves of fallen soldiers. Only in the direst moments would Rome arm slaves with weapons and promise freedom, a desperate echo of what centuries later happened in the American Civil War, when enslaved men were offered emancipation if they fought. But what did life truly look like for a Roman slave? The truth is, it depended on luck. Some endured crushing labor in quarries or mines, where conditions were so horrific that death was considered an escape. Others lived under constant threat of violence on plantations, whipped for the smallest mistake. Yet others, especially those with education, could become tutors, scribes, or accountants, working closely with wealthy families. In rare cases, a trusted slave could manage entire households or estates, holding authority even over free men. Slaves came from everywhere, captured in wars from Gaul, Britain, the Balkans, Greece, and Asia Minor. Others were taken from North Africa, Syria, and Judea. This diversity meant Roman slavery wasn't based on race. A pale-skinned Gaul could be chained alongside a dark-skinned Egyptian, and both were equally considered property. In fact, the Romans didn't view slavery as immoral. Even slaves themselves sometimes accepted it as part of the natural order, since nearly every culture around the Mediterranean practiced some form of slavery. Yet the machine of empire needed them. Without slaves maintaining aqueducts, Rome would have thirsted. Without slaves clearing waste, disease would have ravaged the city. Without slaves producing grain, olive oil, and wine, the empire would have starved. For the rich, slaves were more than workers. They were a sign of status. The wealthiest Romans collected them like living trophies. A senator might own hundreds, even thousands, each assigned to a different task, from pouring wine to trimming nails to reading poetry aloud at dinner. And yet, in this system, there was one thing that set Rome apart: the possibility of freedom. A slave could be manumitted, freed by their master, and in many cases that freedom was real. Freedmen could marry, own property, start businesses, and even rise in society. Some became extremely wealthy. This fragile path to liberty, though rare, gave Roman slavery a different character than what would later emerge in America. Now, fast forward nearly 2,000 years. Across the Atlantic, in the colonies of the New World, another empire was rising. But here, slavery was reborn into something far more absolute. Unlike Rome, American slavery was based on race. It created a permanent divide between black and white, enslaved and free. In Virginia, South Carolina, and beyond, laws declared that if your mother was a slave, you too were a slave, no matter who your father was. Freedom was nearly impossible, and even if granted, racial barriers kept it limited. Where Rome offered manumission, America offered inheritance of chains. The labor was different, too. In Rome, slaves were scattered across thousands of occupations. In America, they were concentrated in brutal agricultural systems. Cotton, tobacco, sugar. These crops demanded endless toil under the sun. Plantations were prisons without walls. The lash was constant, families were torn apart, and religion was twisted to justify bondage. The difference in cruelty was not only in physical suffering, but in identity. Roman slaves could sometimes blend into society once freed. Their children could grow up as citizens. In America, skin color marked generations. Even after slavery ended, the shadow of racism ensured that freedom was never equal. But why compare these two systems? Because they reveal how power shapes humanity. Rome shows us slavery as an ancient necessity for empire, a system tied to conquest and wealth. America shows us slavery as a weapon of race, designed not just to exploit, but to divide forever. Both societies relied on the backs of the enslaved, both grew rich from stolen labor, both justified cruelty as natural. And yet, one allowed the faint hope of freedom, while the other turned bondage into a permanent, inherited condition. The echoes remain. Rome collapsed, but its slavery left marks on law, economy, and culture. America abolished slavery, but the scars are still visible in inequality, prejudice, and a long fight for justice. Slavery, in all its forms, reminds us of a harsh truth. Civilizations rise not only on innovation and culture, but also on exploitation and suffering. Rome and America may be separated by centuries, but both tell the same story of power built on human chains. The question is, have we truly broken them, or do they still rattle in ways we fail to see? Chains break, slave rebellions in Rome and America. Slavery might seem like an unbreakable system, but wherever there are chains, there are always those who dream of breaking them. Both in Rome and in America, the enslaved refused to remain silent. They resisted in whispers and sabotage, and sometimes in fire and blood. Silent resistance in Rome. In Rome, resistance began in the shadows. Slaves slowed their work, broke tools, and stole food. Some whispered coded prayers to foreign gods, clinging to traditions that slavery tried to erase. Others sought small acts of rebellion, faking illness, sabotaging harvests, or fleeing into the wilderness. But every so often, these whispers became a roar. The Roman world witnessed massive slave uprisings, and none was more terrifying to the Republic than the revolt led by Spartacus. Spartacus, Rome's greatest fear. In 73 BCE, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus broke free from a gladiatorial school in Capua. Armed with stolen kitchen knives and makeshift weapons, he and 70 companions stormed out of captivity. What began as a desperate escape soon swelled into a full-scale rebellion. Thousands of slaves flocked to his banner. Farmers, shepherds, gladiators, and laborers saw their chance. At its height, Spartacus commanded an army of more than 70,000 men and women, marching across Italy, defeating Roman legions again and again. The Senate trembled. Here was the nightmare of the elite, a force of enslaved people strong enough to challenge Rome itself. For 2 years, Spartacus and his followers fought not only for survival, but for freedom, hoping to escape Italy altogether. In 71 BCE, Marcus Licinius Crassus finally cornered the rebellion. The Roman army crushed the slaves, and Spartacus fell in battle. As a warning, 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road for miles. Rome sent a clear message. Revolt would be met with unimaginable cruelty. And yet, the legend of Spartacus lived on. Proof that even the most powerless could rise against the empire. Rebellion in the Americas. Centuries later, across the Atlantic, enslaved Africans in the New World faced similar brutality and responded with the same courage. Resistance took many forms. Some slowed their labor, feigned ignorance, or broke farm equipment. Others preserved African songs, dances, and spiritual practices, creating cultures that slavery tried to erase. But like in Rome, there were also moments when rebellion exploded. The most famous of all came in Haiti. In 1791, enslaved Africans on the French colony of Saint-Domingue rose in revolt. Led by men like Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe, they fought not only for their own freedom, but for independence. Against all odds, they defeated Napoleon's armies and founded the first free black republic in 1804. It was the only successful large-scale slave revolution in history, and it terrified slaveholders across the Americas. In the United States, uprisings also shook the South. Gabriel Prosser in 1800, Denmark Vesey in 1822, and Nat Turner in 1831 all led plots or open revolts. Turner's rebellion in Virginia saw enslaved men move from plantation to plantation, killing dozens of white families in a desperate strike for liberty. The rebellion was crushed, but the shock waves were immense. Slaveholders responded with harsher laws and greater fear, knowing that beneath the surface, the enslaved were always waiting for their moment. Freedom through flight. Rebellion didn't always mean open war. For many in both Rome and America, escape was the greatest act of defiance. In Rome, many freedmen found work easily. The empire's vast economy absorbed them into trades, commerce, and public service. They could climb. In America, freedom often meant poverty. Former slaves were pushed into sharecropping, a system that trapped families in debt to white landowners. Without land or resources, most remained tied to the very plantations where they had been enslaved. Economic freedom proved elusive. The difference was stark. Rome offered freedmen the possibility, however limited, of prosperity. America offered freedom on paper, but shackled it with poverty and racial terror. Identity after slavery. In Rome, slavery was not racial. Once freed, a person could blend into the population. Their children could grow up as Romans, indistinguishable from their peers. Freedom erased the stain of bondage within a single generation. In America, race made slavery permanent even after it ended. Skin color marked generations, branding them as different, dangerous, lesser. Even after emancipation, African Americans carried the burden of racism. Freed, but never fully accepted, they were forced to live in a society built to remind them of their place. This is the defining difference between the two legacies. Rome's freedmen were socially limited but legally integrated. America's freedmen were legally freed but socially excluded. The legacy: Rome's slavery eventually faded, replaced by serfdom and feudal labor systems in the Middle Ages. But it left a mark in laws, in social hierarchies, in the very idea that humans could be owned. America's slavery ended, but its shadow remains. Segregation, mass incarceration, systemic inequality, all are echoes of slavery's racial foundation. Where Rome's freedmen could forget their past, America's freedmen were never allowed to. Two paths, one truth. Rome shows us a world where slavery was brutal but porous, where freedom offered a chance at reinvention. America shows us a world where slavery was absolute and freedom was poisoned by racism. Both remind us of one truth. Freedom is never the end of the story. It is the beginning of a struggle to define what that freedom means to those who hold it and to those who would take it away. For more video like this, subscribe, like, and share our channel. Life Fact Daily. Slavery in Rome ended nearly 2,000 years ago. Slavery in America ended more than 150 years ago. Yet, if we listen closely, the sound of chains has never fully disappeared. They echo in our societies, our economies, and our identities. The past is not gone. It is living among us. Lessons from Rome. Rome reminds us that slavery does not simply vanish when masters let go. It reshapes itself. The fall of Rome did not erase bondage. It transformed it. Serfdom, debt peonage, and forced labor spread across medieval Europe. The idea that some people should labor while others benefit never died. It simply changed costume. Rome also shows us that societies can integrate the formerly enslaved, but only if they are willing. Freedmen became part of Rome's economy, even rising to wealth and power. But it required laws that recognized their humanity and an empire willing to allow reinvention. The American shadow. In America, slavery was not just labor, it was identity. And when slavery ended, the racial divide it created did not. Jim Crow laws, segregation, lynching, and disenfranchisement replaced the whip with legal walls. Even after civil rights victories in the 1960s, inequality persisted. Education, housing, policing, and wages carried the weight of centuries of bondage. To this day, racial wealth gaps, discrimination, and systemic bias trace directly back to slavery's foundations. The chain was broken, but its imprint remained, burned into the skin of American society. Modern slavery. We like to believe slavery is gone, but across the world, new forms of bondage persist. The International Labor Organization estimates that more than 40 million people today live under conditions of modern slavery. They are child laborers in mines, women trapped in human trafficking, migrant workers whose passports are taken, forced to toil without pay, families locked into debt bondage in South Asia. Even in wealthy nations, hidden networks of forced labor feed supply chains for clothing, electronics, and agriculture. Like Rome, modern economies are built on invisible labor. Like America, exploitation often targets the vulnerable and marginalized. Slavery may be illegal, but it is not extinct. Cultural echoes. The echoes of Rome and America are also cultural. The story of Spartacus has become a global symbol of rebellion. The story of Harriet Tubman is taught as the embodiment of courage. These legacies remind us that even in bondage, human beings resist, dream, and fight for dignity. But they also remind us how easily power justifies exploitation. Rome saw slavery as natural. America saw it as racial destiny. Today, corporations and governments justify sweatshops, prison labor, and wage exploitation in the name of profit. The rationalizations change. The suffering does not. Freedom's unfinished work. The deepest legacy of slavery is the question it forces us to ask. What does freedom really mean? For a Roman freedman, freedom meant opportunity, but not equality. For an American freedman, freedom meant survival in a world determined to deny it. For millions today, freedom means escaping invisible chains of poverty, discrimination, or coercion. Freedom, it seems, is never given in full. It must be claimed, defended, and expanded with each generation. Two empires, one morning. Rome fell. America survived. But both show us the same truth. Slavery is not only about chains, it is about power. Who has it? Who doesn't? And what those in power will do to keep it. The Roman elite believed their empire could not exist without slaves. American planners believed their economy would collapse without bondage. Both were wrong, and yet both left scars that last centuries. The future, the story of slavery, is not just about Rome or America. It is about us. It is about how societies use labor, justify inequality, and decide who counts as human. The question now is, have we truly broken the chains, or have we simply hidden them? Do we live in a world of freedom, or a world where bondage has just changed form? The answer lies in what we choose to see and what we choose to ignore. Because the past is not past. The chains of Rome, the chains of America, the The chains of today, they're all connected, and only by confronting them can we finally, truly break them. For more video like this, subscribe, like, and share our channel. Life Fact Daily.